Happening, folks. Like I said on the channel recently, I realized there's dozens of movies from late 2022 and early 2023 I haven't even heard of, so I'm committing myself to getting through as many of them as I can as quickly as I can so we're all caught up. As per alphabetical order, which I may or may not stick with depending on how this film works out, the movie we're watching today is called Bed Rest, and apparently it's from the producers of Scream. I thought the first Scream was great. It's a brilliant concept, and obviously Wes Craven knows how to convey brilliant concepts, but the sequels always felt like cash grabs to me, and I never really bothered with them. Today's movie also stars Melissa Barrera, who starred in Scream 5 and 6. I don't really have an opinion of her. She has big, lovely, brown, googly eyes, and she read her lines in Scream 5. Not that I remember any of them. And I haven't bothered with Scream 6 yet, which technically makes it eligible for these coding commentaries now that I think about it. Bed Rest is a late 2022 American horror thriller directed by Laurie Evans Taylor. I do not know who that is. A pregnant woman on bed rest, see what they did there? Wonders if her new house is haunted or if it's all in her head. Okay, so the premise is a combination of two very old, tired tropes, and now I have a feeling this is going to be a very long day, folks. But not to worry, I'll edit most of the pain out of it for you guys. There's an astounding number of horror movies that focus on that 9-month period in some women's lives, and I think that's with good reason. Obviously, women are at their most vulnerable, they're physically less capable while simultaneously having to look after a whole other person, so conceptually, it's great fodder for horror movies. Conceptually. And that is enough rambling from me. Let's go. Well, whatever Melissa Barrera is doing for a living in this movie, she's a zillionaire, because that house is massive and every inch of it's spilling over with tradesmen. And when this guy tells her they're going to need to do tons more work, she just nods her head and tells him to recommend somebody. When people start telling me something's going to cost more, my brain kind of starts floating off somewhere more pleasant, and apparently my eye twitches and I do a bunch of fake smiles, and that is according to my ex-girlfriend who was with me the last time I purchased a car. Aww. Hang on a second. He's giving off about how bad the rot and the mold is, and she's like, okay, she's very pregnant. Isn't that potentially life-threatening to adults, never mind little babies? Way to convey the motherly instincts. We're only 4 minutes into this movie, by the way, and I'm already getting sarcastic, which is not usually a good sign. So this guy, who kind of looks like a prototype of one of Danny DeVito's henchmen in Batman Returns, finds a charm bracelet in the pipes and hands it over to her, and again, she just takes it in her hand. Germs, woman. Bacteria. Ugh.
Why can't anything be easy?
I'm easy.
Well, I suppose if your goal was to remove all the natural beauty and dignified elegance from an expectant mother, that's definitely one way to do it. It is a pretty weird goal, though.
No.
Jesus, it sounded like the whole back half of the house just collapsed and they're tripping over each other laughing at it. So either they are actually zillionaires or they're so madly in love with each other that I am going to throw up. What the fuck? So Danny DeVito's henchman pulled that charm bracelet out of the sludge in an old pipe and she just put it on. She has the money to laugh at sections of her new house collapsing all around her, but she throws on somebody else's filthy, greasy trinket without even throwing a squirt of Palmolive over it? So the sophisticated English husband notices his heavily pregnant wife's listening intently to something on the other side of a door, so he sneaks up behind her and scares the shit out of her, which is definitely very sophisticated behavior. Sorry, darling, I'm a total bastard sometimes. I didn't mean to kill the child. So he's a professor or a teacher, and what's that, like 60, 100 grand tops? So then what the hell is she doing for work for them to be able to own? Oh, she has an antiques business. How very original and lucrative.
How did you two meet?
This older couple asked these two how they met, and they're 100% regretting that shit already. I hate couples like that. Not that I know any, because there are no couples like that in real life. The only actual couples in real life who legitimately burst into a song and a dance when they're asked about their own origin stories like that are the ones who met on those undateable shows. Only with them, it's like totally the opposite, because you're like, yes! Go for it! You two are friggin' adorable! Tell me all about it! So after wandering around this party for way too long because the editor isn't really on the ball. This woman asks her where they've moved, and Melissa Barrera tells her 8317 Lakeview, and this random woman says, "Oh, I used to know a man that lived at that exact house, but his wife became quite ill, and wasn't that fucking convenient?" I do get it. Writers have to convey story information somehow, but you're meant to do it in a way that the audience doesn't notice it. This woman didn't even introduce herself, and we still don't even know who she is. And then the woman asks if it's their first baby, and the sophisticated English husband says yes, so Melissa Barrera tears into him at the house for not telling the stranger at the party she had a miscarriage. And as she's storming off on him, simultaneously reminding me why I never got married, she sees this little fella in a reflection, and that sends her tumbling down the stairs. And although she did land on her bum, it somehow knocked her unconscious with her eyes wide open. You gotta be very, very careful with those secret bum pressure points, folks. They'll get you every time. I mean, everyone knows any decent martial artist can render you totally helpless with a well-placed ass strike. Anyways, the blow to the bum sends her off on a flashback to her miscarriage, and everything is extremely overacted. And there's screaming and screaming and screaming. From the producers of Scream. But when she comes back around again, they find out the baby's all good, but she has to rest in bed for the remainder of her term, which is 8 weeks. Folks, when I do these reviews, I try to stay impartial for as long as I possibly can. We are exactly 15 minutes into this movie, and I can't bite my tongue anymore already. They just established how upset she was her husband didn't tell a total stranger at a party that she had a miscarriage. Then they literally showed us the event itself and all of her Hollywood howling. By their own writing, the event was devastating to her, and rightfully so. I can't imagine what that must be like for a couple to have to go through, specifically the mother. So she falls down the stairs, the baby survives. The doctor insists she spends the last 8 weeks of the term comfortably in bed, which is absolutely reasonable given the circumstances, and she argues with him because she wants to oversee the house renovations. I'm sure most of you know this already. Her falling down the stairs is what's known as the inciting incident in story terms. It's something that happens around the 15 to 20 minute point in a screenplay, and it acts as a catalyst to push the main character into the rest of the story. I can deal with shitty special effects and half-assed acting and even the odd plot hole depending on how the rest of the movie's holding up. But now that I know they haven't even bothered to write a lead character that makes sense, I am going to notice every little thing from here on in. It's not intentional. I can't help it. So folks, if my sarcastic quips rub you the wrong way or you're just not in the mood for that kind of thing at the minute, I get it and I respect that. Thank you very much for watching up until this point, and hopefully I will see you for the next video. But for those of you who don't mind me being myself... Why isn't this girl fucking ecstatic? The child survived, her sophisticated English teacher of a husband's hanging off of her, looking after everything she needs, except what the f... He put everything she needs on a table beside the bed and left it just far enough away that she'll need to use a grabbing tool to get at it, which will definitely force her to twist at her hips. Bring the fucking table closer. Or set everything next to her on a tray. He's away at work all day anyways. Oh, and he bought them a pair of walkie-talkies because they've already paid for the cell phones they normally use to communicate with each other, and where's the fun in not spending money? And besides, you'd never hear supernatural stuff through cell phones. Aha! The first of the obstacles placed in front of our lovely protagonist. Her pen has run out of ink, so she just gives up on writing. Actually, that totally works for me. But then she hears a baby and some banging and some more baby and some even louder banging. So she gets up and goes after that, which is fantastic decision making. Pens cause innumerable deaths every year, whereas loud bangs and creepy baby sounds in the backs of strange closets, not so much. Sophisticated English teacher husband, whose name is Daniel in this movie, by the way, if anybody cares. He's played by Guy Burnett, who's done a handful of films, but nothing that would ever really make its way to this channel. Although I have been toying with the idea of reviewing rom-coms and superimposing my own plots over them. Anyways, sophisticated English teacher husband comes home and sees that Melissa Barrera has gone all the way down the stairs to collect a parcel from a courier. So she wouldn't get a pen from 5 feet away, but going down the stairs to carry something heavy all the way back up the stairs is totally fine. And when he reminds her she's not meant to be doing that, she freaks out on him.
What are you, my freaking jailer? I can't get up, I can't walk around, I can't go outside.
Even though she knows it could result in something terrible, she definitely doesn't want to happen a second time. I've talked about this before in previous reviews. This is what I like to call artificial chaos. It's something shitty writers do when they can't figure out how to harness the natural tension that would arise from a properly written scenario. Whatever am I talking about? This movie got off on the wrong foot because it's got Melissa Barrera contradicting herself fundamentally from the start. The writer tells us up front that motherhood is vital to this character, and then we're shown her putting her own boredom and frustration ahead of her unborn child's safety, and obviously that's contradictory. And then she flips out on her sophisticated English teacher husband when her actions upset him. And he has every right to be upset because he's her sophisticated English teacher husband and he's a sophisticated English teacher father of the child. That's right. She should be apologetic knowing he's right to be upset, and this is frying my circuitry because it's double contradictory. I'm sure this kind of thing doesn't bother a lot of people, but it gets right up my nose. So then he apologizes to her. I'm not even going to acknowledge that beyond pointing it out. And for anybody saying, but Johnny, she's pregnant, he's keeping the peace, and that makes him a good husband. Let me just condense that scene for you. Honey, I'm home. Did you go all the way downstairs to collect that parcel? The doctor said that could kill our baby. But I was really bored. Well, I never thought about it that way. I'm sorry, darling. Do carry on. This is all starting to sound a lot like a soap opera, and I'm sorry for that, but there hasn't been any horror in this horror movie yet. Now the closet situation's repeating itself, only this time she sees the boy again, so sophisticated English teacher husband grabs his 9-iron from the closet, but there's nothing there. So he tells her to get some rest and pats her on the head, which I suppose is kind of like horror if you consider how terrifying the prospect of condescending to a pregnant woman can be. Am I right? Then she sees a little boy outside, only now she's not frightened of him at all, apparently. Until, that is, the boy points at her and calls her his mama. So that makes her check all the security cameras, because... a fucking cat jump scare scene, are you kidding me? The laziest of the most basic building blocks in scary movies. Roger Ebert used to call them spring-loaded cat, and they are such an overused, tired, boring trope. Even using them ironically to make fun of cat jump scares got stale like 20 years ago. So she tells the cat in the other room to get away from the camera, and it does, because cats always answer to their names and do what you ask them to do, right? So she stares into the monitor for ages until they plant another kid's face in the mirror, and this time she calls 911. And wouldn't you know it, the operator asks her if she can make it to the door to lock it, so she sprints over to it, and then she flings herself onto the floor. She didn't trip over anything, she wasn't responding to something jumping out in front of her, she just flung herself on the floor. And then she sees kids' footsteps on the ceiling. If I was having some kind of supernatural back and forth in my house, I would want it to be a kid. I could easily beat up like a dozen kids. I wouldn't, but I could. And that makes me a good person. So sophisticated English teacher husband comes home, or Seth, as I'm going to start calling him. I swear that was not rehearsed. He says he's worried now that she's relapsing again and he needs to know that the past isn't going to repeat itself. She's pregnant. She's also supposedly under a tremendous amount of pressure because of what happened with the previous baby. Those things together are all you need to create a scenario in which she might not be a reliable narrator. It's another massive trope used in horrors and thrillers when they want to make things difficult for the protagonist to convince people what's actually happening to them. They can make them recovering addicts, or they might have a criminal record that makes them untrustable, or if they're pregnant, they might have baby brain. But this writer's just piled two things on top of each other, and that's flat out crappy writing. It's just throwing as much shit at the wall as you can. Aha. It turns out the director I've never heard of also wrote this, and now I know why this is on my list of recent movies I've never heard of. Then the not creepy at all kid shows up at the foot of the bed, and that's just not creepy. This is creepy. He asks if his sister could come out and play, and at nearly 40 minutes into this movie, I wish her unborn child would come out and play, so at least something would fucking happen. So our main man Seth brings in a nurse, and the nurse reveals she wasn't able to conceive children herself because that's usually the kind of thing you say during a getting to know you chit chat. And we learn Melissa Barrera was institutionalized for 6 weeks after the previous child's death because she kept seeing her son everywhere because her mind wasn't ready to let go. And that means her behavior makes even less sense because the miscarriage hurt her so deeply they hospitalized her. And if that was actually the case, she would be insisting on bed rest herself from the second she conceived. Am I wrong? Am I totally misreading this? Also, just thinking about it now, private nurses. These two must actually be minted. Like, where I live, the doctors aren't even taking telephone appointments anymore. Or since those By the way, we are 45 minutes in. No scares yet. This picking random movies idea is fantastic, Johnny. Oops, I've spoken too soon. The kid showed up during her bath and pointed at her. Very scary. So the doctors come back in again and check her out, and everything is fine, except for me beginning to lose the will to live. The doctor says he's concerned about her, and he asks about the little boy she's been seeing. With this sort of unreliable narrator kind of story, at the 45-minute point, the goal should be to have the audience questioning what's real and what's not. And the writer's job is to give us evidence for both potential outcomes. Either she's delusional, or there's a ghost in the house, and it could be either. When this sort of thing's done properly in movies like Jacob's Ladder, or Fight Club, or Memento, or Sixth Sense. At the 45-minute point, you're racking your brain trying to figure out what the hell's going on, and it's a brilliant place to be. That is movie magic. But because of all the blatant inconsistencies in this movie, you don't really care which of the outcomes it'll end up being. You've basically checked out of the movie already, and you're probably scrolling through your phone. I certainly would be, if all you fine people weren't watching me. The doctor asks Seth and the nurse to leave them alone. It takes him like 10 minutes to get out of the 3,500 square foot bedroom. So she tries telling him it's insomnia that's actually messing her up, but he suggests bed rest is very difficult for anybody and insists she start taking medication again. And then he gets up and leaves, and on his way out, just like her husband did earlier, he tells the insomniac who's struggling with bed rest to try and get some bed rest. And that is why he is a doctor. I have the results back from your tests, and I'm afraid you have leukemia. And as your doctor, I have to tell you, you really shouldn't have cancer. It's not very good for you. Then she uses her little gizmo to listen in on the doctor telling Seth his wife's got problems. Then she starts taking tablets, and then piano music comes on, and everything's instantly amazing. Until the boring kid comes back, and this time, the cat sees the ghosts, and as a fan of animals, I certainly hope the fucking cat was scared, so at least somebody is. Although he doesn't look very scared. The kid comes back while she's in the tub again. Why does he keep showing up when she's in the bath? And again, if I was a ghost, and the not creepy at all ghost tells her she has to leave because she wants baby sister, only we don't know who she is yet. And then the private nurse who's being paid to provide one-on-one healthcare says, I almost forgot you have to take your medication, meaning she nearly forgot to do the only thing she's really there to do. So Melissa Barrera tells Seth the ghost of their dead son's trying to warn them about the nurse. And when Seth tries arguing the point, she screams at him again because she had a miscarriage. And this movie is so shitty. It's so shitty. In the next scene, it shows Mama throwing her medication down the toilet. And I don't know if that means she's never been taking it or she just stopped taking it recently. Then the nurse gives her a big, long, random story about a woman that used to live in the house who also lost a baby and ended up terminating herself as a result. It just occurred to me, Melissa Barrera's only spoken to 2 women this entire movie. Both of them were total strangers, and both of them had detailed, intimate knowledge of the house and its history. That is brilliant writing. When Barrera asks her the woman's name, she says, Melandra Kenzie. And then the nurse says, you should try and get some bed rest. So she looks at the charm bracelet she's been wearing this whole time that doesn't belong to her, and she washes it to find MK inscribed on it. She's been wearing it for 7 fucking weeks while she's heavily pregnant. It came from a filthy, disgusting drain, and she's only just washed it right now. And then she checks the paperwork on the house, and apparently they bought it off Melandra Kenzie, as if you wouldn't already know the name of the person you bought the house from because there's hardly any paperwork associated with purchasing a fucking home. And then she hears something again, so she attaches her cell phone to the auto vacuum and maneuvers it around the house like a remote control car. And then this happens. So she calls the nurse on the old walkie-talkie, and while the nurse is off getting their stuff together for the hospital trip, Melissa hops on the internet to read about Melandra Kenzie while she's in labor. And then she sees a photograph of the little ghost boy, and it's one of Melandra's kids and not her own. And now we know why he was choosing to show up when she was in the bathtub. When she tries explaining to Seth, he says he knew this woman lived there before them. So, of course, she gets furious again, even though she's literally about to deliver her baby. And then the house starts shaking and Barrera starts screaming again. And the nurse gets tossed out the window, and Seth gets knocked out, so Melissa Barrera uses that tried and tested paranormal defense mechanism known as the fuck you method. And that is by far the best paranormal hack that I'm aware of. But surprisingly, it didn't work, and then she's tossed into a bathtub at 100 miles an hour whilst in labor. What am I doing with my life? And she screams again and again, and what it's doing to my eardrums is probably very similar to the pain of delivering a child. Only kidding, ladies. And then a perfectly clean 4-month-old baby comes out, and she's like, oh, hello there. After all that, she just delivered a baby without noticing. And then the ghost of Melandra Kenzie starts sucking some special effects out of the baby's mouth, and then Barrera says,
"You don't get this one, bitch!"
And the bathtub plunges through the floor, but the newborn baby's fine, so Seth comes to help, but Melissa tells him to leave with the baby. And he does. Probably because she's been screaming at him for the whole movie. Then Melissa Barrera beats up the ghost, and you've gotta be fucking kidding me. The newborn baby survived the fall, but Melissa Barrera didn't, so she was a ghost when she fought Melandra Kenzie's ghost. Then she picked up the ghost of her first baby and was about to head off to heaven with it until the ghost of the nurse offered to babysit her ghost child for her. And the ghost nurse doesn't even look upset. She was just kicked through a window and killed. She's like, sure, I'll babysit. That poor nurse just worked her ass off serving other people her entire life, only to be killed while she was working so she could be handed a babysitting job the moment she arrived in heaven. So Melissa Barrera goes back into her body, and the entire mansion's refurbished head to toe on Seth's professor wage, and everyone lived happily ever after. And there you have it, folks, the first and maybe last in my catch-up series, Bed Rest. I appreciate every single one of you for watching my reviews, and obviously I respect you as intelligent individuals, and as such I would never tell any of you what to do, but do not watch this movie. One down, potentially a lot more to go, and I will let you guys decide whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Until next time, folks.